Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
This episode of the Gegenpressing Podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for the NBA and NHL playoffs this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino, get in on our game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Don't forget to use the promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, BELIEVE, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu Feth, he's Stefan Bienkowski, and this is the preview show. Although, Stefan, we only have one game to preview this weekend, and that is the German Cup Final, the DFB Pokal Final. I'm in Berlin, getting ready for the final, but how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Looking forward to the final. Hopefully it'll be more of a spectacle than the last final we watched this week, of course, the Europa League final, which ended up being the biggest kind of anticlimax of all anticlimaxes of this season. I don't just mean in the sense that, I want Leverkusen to play well. I'm just hoping for a more kind of competitive game, to be honest with you, because, that game was over very quickly. But I suspect it will be. The Pokal and their finals are always great fun. It's always a great occasion. You go out of your way to get to these games. How many is this now in a row you've done?
4. This is number 4. And then I did 2 before COVID as well. I missed the one in 2020. Because I was locked on Vancouver Island like everyone else was around the world. So otherwise it would be 6 in a row. But yeah, 4 in a row now. 5th. No, actually that's false. I also went to one with Chris Williams. So this is my 6th final. So yeah, I've gone out of my way every year to do it. And I love it, Stefan. It's one of my favorite games, no matter who's in it.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, but and I guess it's not as relevant this season since Leverkusen obviously won the Bundesliga, but over the course of the last 11 seasons, the Pokal has been a kind of respite from the wall-to-wall Bayern Munich dominance of the league. It's, the knockout competition has had a unique ability of keeping out of Bayern's kind of grasp, and as a result, it's often meant that we've been able to celebrate other teams, whether that's Leipzig, Freiburg, Dortmund, all sorts of clubs really. And of course, this season, we get to obviously talk about Xabi Alonso's Leverkusen side, but we also get to talk about Kaiserslautern, who are not often in the limelight these days.
Although they should be. This is one of Germany's most historic clubs. Speaking, going out of my way, I went to Kaiserslautern on the weekend, last weekend. First time. It is a really small town, and there's an in-depth article on the place on the Substack, which I do urge people to read it, not because I wrote it, but because I actually think it reveals a lot about the city and the place that it is. And it is really fascinating to me how much bigger of a club they are than the city of Kaiserslautern actually is in the context of German history. Kaiserslautern, the club, is the city rather than the other way around. And yet, they're so very important for the history of modern German football. There's the 5 players that started for Germany in the 1954 World Cup final, right? Then there's the many championships that the spine of the team won in the 50s, not just the two German titles, but also various regional championships, because Germany was still separated into different districts after World War II, right? As the country was occupied by the Allied forces. So Kaiserslautern was a really dominant force in the 50s, and then in the 60s, 70s, and 80s it was a little less, but this was still a place that teams hated to go to because of the Betzenberg, the Devil's Mountain, where the stadium is located on. It was a very hostile place for away teams. And then, of course, in the 1990s, when they won the 2 more Bundesliga titles, and the whole miracle that they achieved when they won the DFB Pokal in 1996, that year they went down to the second division, but they won the second division that year and then went straight up and won the Bundesliga, right? And then played Champions League football for years too. Stefan, this is, I think people don't quite, the older generations get it, but I think not everyone kind of understands that from a historical perspective, Kaiserslautern are actually the bigger club here.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually talked about this at the time when they got to the final, and they obviously beat Saarbrücken to get past semi-finals, and how for people of a certain vintage, like such as myself, Kaiserslautern and to an extent Leverkusen are clubs that a lot of people in the UK associate with German football if they kind of grew up, in the 90s and maybe a little before that, because, that's obviously when Kaiserslautern, were the team that kind of caused such an upset with the league titles, of course. I can think of at least one British reporter, sports writer who covers German football, who's told me before that, Kaiserslautern are what got them into German football in the first place, for example. Not to say that they're a Kaiserslautern fan, but that's what was their kind of gateway into covering the league, much like maybe people in the next generation had Dortmund for that. I know Dortmund, they're not minnows who, got into German football, but obviously that Jurgen Klopp side that kind of got to the Champions League final was a way for a lot of people to kind of get into German football. So they're absolutely that, and to an extent so are Leverkusen, because, when I honestly think if you were to poll, 100 football fans in the UK to name German football clubs, I would say, well, of a certain age, I would think Leverkusen would probably come behind Bayern and Dortmund because of that kind of great, Michel Ballack team that got to the final, and so many players of the years, maybe Werder Bremen up there as well. So it's a fantastic kind of it's fantastic kind of showdown between two clubs, obviously contrasting support, contrasting histories, but also kind of two clubs that are kind of callback to a previous era of German football. Leverkusen obviously have stayed in the league for since then, and they've kind of bumbled about kind of fourth and fifth place and third place to an extent for the last number of years, and Xabi Alonso's obviously take them higher. But it's just nice that a lot of people will probably stick on their televisions on Saturday, see Kaiserslautern versus Leverkusen, and it might intrigue them a lot more than, Bayern Munich versus Leipzig.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Germans will be watching. I always knew what Kaiserslautern is like. One of my uncles is actually two of my uncles, now that I think of it, are from Kaiserslautern. One unfortunately has passed away a few years ago, but they're both from Kaiserslautern, and so I've always heard the stories. And then, of course, my club 1860 has a very close fan friendship that exists to the present day. In fact, when I went to Kaiserslautern, they were Kaiserslautern fans wearing the half and half scarf, and there was even a few 1860 fans that went out to support them. So there has always been that connection. But what I never quite understood, Stefan, and I try to convey this in the article that I wrote, is how big the stadium is and how small the town is at the same time. It just towers over the city, right? Because it is on a mountain. You have to do almost this pilgrimage up the hill. And when you get to the top of the hill, it's almost like there's another hill, which is the stadium, because this is a 50,000 seat stadium built on the smallest possible footprint that you can imagine. So the stands are just the steep stands. And it's almost overwhelming in a way. It's, kind of like the Westfalenstadion in Dortmund, but even steeper and bigger because of the small size of the area that it's on. And I can understand why players in the past, when they had to walk up there through the crowd, because to get there it's all crowds. There's two roads that go up and all the fans walk up it, right? Like 80% of the fans that go to the stadium walk up the hill. And it makes you realize how hostile that might be for opponents, and how much that entire community is just stuck together in this gathering place. Like, it used to be cathedrals at the top of the hill that people go to. In Kaiserslautern, it's the club. And I've more on that in the article that I wrote, which again I think people should read. But I think it really conveys how important, how massive it is, not just for the fans of the club, but really that entire region that so strongly identifies with the team, with the Betzenberg and the Betze, right, and all that sort of thing. And yeah, I'm tremendously looking forward to it, and I think a lot of people in Germany are looking forward to it, because I'm of a vintage where Kaiserslautern were always the team in the Bundesliga, and they were sort of the team that would stick it to the big sides. In fact, Stefan, there is a really interesting quote that is on a monument outside of the Kaiserslautern Stadium. The monument has the 5 Kaiserslautern World Cup winners, and then there's a quote from Sepp Herberger, who was the World Cup winning coach. And I think this quote is so fitting because of what Kaiserslautern faced in this final. And the quote reads, "The underdog role is the key to the treasure trove of unmeasurable strengths, which, when awoken and stoked, releases energy that can help to move mountains." I think that's Kaiserslautern's motto for the final, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And it'll be fascinating to see what their fans can bring to the stadium in Berlin, because obviously it's a big difference between, playing at home in front of your own fans and playing in a neutral stadium, and a very different type of stadium, obviously, where in Berlin it's a kind of open bowl kind of situation. It's going to be fascinating, and I think that's another great thing. The fans are going to be tremendous. The atmosphere is going to be outstanding, and that's the kind of great thing that's the great thing I think that the Pokal has offered for a number of years now, where it has been such a nice variety of opponents and finalists. I mean, obviously Freiburg and Leipzig are perhaps a little bit overrepresented, shall we say, in recent years, but you can kind of go through the list. Obviously Kaiserslautern, Frankfurt the year before, Freiburg obviously bring great fans. Dortmund, when they played Leipzig, have a great fan support. There's always at least one club that can kind of bring an army of supporters, and of course Leverkusen will have plenty of fans there too, but Kaiserslautern in particular will just bring so much colour. And it'll be interesting to see what they do in the game itself, because on the one hand, they are obviously huge underdogs in this match, and we can maybe touch on this now, if you kind of look at their route to the final, they've kind of constantly kind of overcome expectation to an extent. Obviously in the second round, they'll knock out FC Köln, which at the time was a bigger achievement that is now maybe conceived now in hindsight, since Köln obviously kind of nosedived and kind of got relegated, but usually obviously beat Nuremberg in the following game, Hertha Berlin as well, and then of course Saarbrücken. And I think the interesting thing is, if you kind of look at those Hertha Berlin and Saarbrücken performances, those were games in which the opponents really dominated the game, really dominated possession, really dominated the chances, and there was a Saarbrücken game in particular which I remember watching, and Saarbrücken absolutely dominated them in the first half, and it felt as though Kaiserslautern were just kind of hanging on for dear life. It was a bit like when you watch those kind of heavyweight boxing matches and one of the opponents is on the ropes and you're just kind of waiting for the opposing fighter to kind of land a knockout blow. But there's just something about this Kaiserslautern team that just allowed them to come back, and they just completely flipped the game on its head. And I think that will probably put them in good stead for this match. Whether it'll be enough is obviously a tall order, but the manner in which they've got to this final, the manner in which they've continued to completely upset the odds, you'd think is probably means they're as well suited for this game as they possibly could be, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think they actually got to train that a little bit on the weekend. People will look at the result against Eintracht Braunschweig and see a comprehensive 5-0 victory, but they played large parts of the game with a man down, Stefan. And I thought it was really impressive how they almost absorbed the pressure and really quickly hit on the counter-attack. Marlon Ritter was the player that stood out to me. He scored 3 goals, including a couple of worldly goals that were fantastic finishes. And I actually kind of sense that they're almost a team that is the most comfortable when they don't have to have the ball. And I think that was actually, in fairness, actually was an issue for them this season, because the way this Thomas Hengen, the CEO, and put together the squad, the expectations were much higher. Remember, I spent the preseason with Kaiserslautern in the United States, right? And we did a bunch of articles on them. And they played a really good season last year where they flirted with promotion at times. And this was the year they were going to build on this. And they put together a squad accordingly. And it just didn't quite work out. The quality was always there. The problem was that they almost built a squad that it relishes the underdog role more than being a team that likes to have the ball, which I think is why they did so well in the Pokal and why they did ultimately not fulfill their goals in the league. Which is fascinating, right? Because at the end of the day, they're now going into this cup final in a position that is great for them, and they have a squad that could actually maybe pull this off, even though the squad building was actually not something that they consider a success.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And it's, I mean, we do see this from time to time, obviously, where teams do kind of thrive in cup competitions, but then kind of struggle domestically. When it comes to Bayern, obviously Eintracht Frankfurt, getting to the Europa League final, obviously getting to Pokal finals as well, whereas their league form is kind of so-so. And it's a fascinating kind of aspect of football. I don't really know if you can chalk up to tactics or player selection, or maybe it's just a kind of mentality thing that players just play differently in knockout games. Perhaps it's the idea that, with one solid 90 minutes, you can achieve something where in a league game, it's just an extra 2 points, an extra 3 points, and it's hard to do that over the course of like 34 games, whereas in these one-off games, players just seem to step up an extra 5 or 10%. But yeah, we'll need to see how far that goes and whether it's enough to stop a Leverkusen side who are no longer unbeaten.
Yeah. The psychology now is really fascinating. Kaiserslautern could have been the team to end this streak, unbeaten streak for Leverkusen, which would have been a fascinating storyline. That's no longer the case. Leverkusen go into this game following a defeat in the Europa League final against an Atalanta side who, in some ways, obviously at a much higher level than Kaiserslautern, will approach this game exactly like Kaiserslautern. I think will approach it through physicality, through strong man marking, through pushing up high, right, to make this game uncomfortable. Kaiserslautern know how to play that way too from the Zweite Bundesliga, where this is very much the case. But Stefan, when we said on the bonus show when we broke down the Leverkusen defeat to Atalanta that we both wanted to sit and think a little bit before we previewed the final. Now here we are, and I had some time to think about it, and I think one of the big factors in that Europa League final, and it's going to be fascinating to see if they can pick themselves up and do it one more time and just unleash that last little bit of energy that the squad has to get at least a double over the line. But I think one of the factors that we haven't mentioned at all in the Atalanta game is I think this Leverkusen team is tired. I think there isn't much left there. And I think that was one of the reasons too why they lost that game. It is the way that they played all season with these last minute comebacks in the 98th minute. That goes on substance. And I think the Atalanta game was just one too many. There was too many players that were no longer able to go to 110%, which you need to do. And I am curious. They flew directly from Dublin to Berlin. And I'm so curious if they have the energy to do this one more time. And that is, I think, maybe the most fascinating aspect to me, because they can do tactically whatever they want. If this team doesn't have the energy to pick themselves up, then Kaiserslautern will have a real chance here.
Yeah, I mean, can we just take a minute to appreciate how stupid it is to play the Europa League final on a Wednesday night? I didn't really get a moment to talk about that on the bonus show after the game. I don't know if maybe it works for like TV ratings, in the sense that people can tune in during the midweek, and obviously nations up and down the country have their domestic cups this weekend. Obviously the Pokal in Germany and the FA Cup in England, for example. But And to be fair, I don't really know where you put it, but playing on a Wednesday just doesn't seem to make any sense to me. It doesn't do the fans any favours, doesn't do the spectacle any favours, where it's no longer feels like a real kind of moment to savour, because obviously people are just kind of wedging it in between when they get back from work and when they have to go to bed and things like that. And I get that obviously the European Cup used to be something similar, but it just feels like UEFA just kind of slot it in between match days and cup finals, and we're now in a situation for poor Leverkusen where they're basically playing 2 cup finals over the course of 3 days. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a really important, astute point that, Leverkusen do look tired. I think Xabi Alonso's done a great job of kind of rotating the squad this season, not just in terms of moving players in and out, but the manner in which they more or less seamlessly managed to navigate an African Cup of Nations, which meant they missed 4 or 5 players. Big injuries, of course, Patrick Schick and Boniface, perhaps the most obvious examples of that. And even the way that the way that Alonso has been able to kind of seamlessly slot in guys like Nathan Tella in for Frimpong has been really impressive. But yeah, there's no denying that they were exhausted on Wednesday in that Atalanta game, and I do kind of wonder if they'd been given a full week to recover and play that game on a Saturday, if we maybe would have seen a different performance. But as we noted during the game, Alonso's tactics and player selection were just all over the place. Whether that was due to injuries and fitness and fatigue is a fair point, and we'll have to kind of see what team goes out this weekend, because Simon Rolfes spoke after the final, and he was asked, obviously the big talk was the fact that Adli was played as a kind of false number 9 rather than Leverkusen playing with an actual traditional number 9 and a striker. And he more or less said, look, we will play with a striker on Saturday, there's no doubt about it. And that may have just been a way of him to try to kind of pour cold water over the kind of anger and resentment over the fact that Alonso went with a strikerless formation and it didn't work. Because when they then get into the specifics of it, he then kind of admitted that neither Patrick Schick nor Victor Boniface are 100% fit, which was probably clear for all to see when they came on Wednesday. So there's that aspect to it too, where Leverkusen might be playing with a half-fit striker up front, and perhaps even more concerningly, the guys behind them, the real powerhouse in this team, Florian Wirtz and Granit Xhaka, both looked far from their best against Atalanta. It'd be one thing if Leverkusen were dominating possession and just couldn't pierce through Atalanta's defence because they didn't have a number 9 in the box. But Wirtz and Wirtz and Granit Xhaka just did not look like themselves at all. And Wirtz obviously got pulled off before full time as well. So those are concerns, I think, for Leverkusen. And that's probably where, if Kaiserslautern are going to cause an upset, it'll be down to the fact that this Leverkusen team, have done well to kind of navigate a long season. But, we talked about this a few weeks ago in the sense that, when they were really going through a really remarkable run of scoring late goals. And, I was saying at the time, I was like, I can't remember which game it was, but I was saying, it's magical and it's a spectacle now, but these little margins are the kind of things that drop off from one season to the next. And that's when you can go from suddenly being first in the league to like 7th, because those, 30 plus goals that you scored in the last 10 minutes of games just don't happen. And it's interesting that we're maybe already beginning to see a bit of that with Leverkusen, where they just completely dropped off in this game against Atalanta, and we'll have to wait to see what they put up against Kaiserslautern.
I made this point on Wednesday night that I wonder if Alonso overthought this, and I wonder how he's going to respond to it in the final. He's facing a head coach in Friedhelm Funkel, who's reached the final 5 times, twice as a player. He won it with Bayer Uerdingen, back when Uerdingen was still part of the Bayer company. And he lost it as a player in 1981. So won it in 1985 with Bayer Uerdingen, lost it as a player in 1981 with Kaiserslautern, by the way, Stefan. So this is his second chance with Kaiserslautern to win the DFB Pokal. But he's also been there 3 times as a coach. 1998 with MSV Duisburg, where he lost to Bayern Munich. And in 2006, twice there as a coach. And in 2006, also with Eintracht Frankfurt, where he also lost to Bayern Munich. He now gets a 3rd opportunity as a head coach to win a DFB Pokal Final. This time with Kaiserslautern, of course. Second time around with Kaiserslautern, this time as a coach too. It's going to be fascinating what his lessons are going to be, because he's going to be the more experienced final head coach in this, right? Because Alonso has never coached a final in the German Cup, and this is only his second final period as a head coach. He's lost one now. Is he going to win a second? I think Friedhelm Funkel is going to keep this as simple as possible, but will Alonso do the same?
Oh, sorry, had my microphone muted. Yeah, absolutely, it'll be fascinating. It's just going to be such an interesting game, and it is good. I'm just kind of intrigued by, obviously there's a whole Kaiserslautern thing, but I'm also just intrigued by the way that this kind of ends up kind of bookmarking Leverkusen's season, because we were kind of joking about it before recording, that now that Leverkusen lost that Europa League final, the air has just been taken out of their wind, or the wind has been taken out of their sails rather, entirely. The international attention hasn't gone entirely, but it's nowhere near what it was, because all of a sudden Leverkusen aren't going to that historic treble. All of a sudden they're no longer unbeaten. All of a sudden the shine has kind of come off Xabi Alonso to an extent. And in a kind of roundabout way, this Pokal could go on to kind of define not how good a coach he is, of course, and what they achieved in the Bundesliga. Of course, those things are, beyond kind of recalculation or beyond hindsight, but the kind of, guess what, I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for, but the kind of aura or the kind of tone with which people talk about him this summer could be impacted by what happens in this Pokal. If they go on and win it, Leverkusen do the double. They finish the season unbeaten in German football, which is still a remarkable achievement. And, they've got so much to celebrate and so much to talk about. And hey, let's be honest, the Pokal trophy's just something incredible to have. When you go to Leverkusen, they have that one, or not the official one, I guess. It's a replica of when they beat Hertha Berlin's second side. In the lobby, and it was their only trophy, obviously, there. But
no, the UEFA Cup is there too.
Is it? Oh, I suppose it is, isn't it?
Yeah. I think people forget that they had already won the Europa League / UEFA Cup, right? So,
I mean, I must have didn't have my glasses on at the time. I'm always just drawn to the Pokal because it just looks obscene. It looks like something from like the Avengers Infinity Gauntlet or something. But yeah, I just think, having that in their hands, as long as the Bundesliga, it kind of redefines the narrative a wee bit, as opposed to if they lose this game. And maybe I'm just kind of reading into that too much because I'm a football writer and I kind of do focus on these kind of narratives a bit more than your average Joe, I suppose. But I guess it means they can finish the season and celebrate, and of course put that Europa League defeat behind them.
I mean, also, and I think, the defeat to Atalanta is sad and all that, but I actually think the DFB Pokal in the German consciousness is still bigger than the Europa League, because at the end of the day, that's a secondary trophy, right? Even in international football, the DFB Pokal holds such an incredible big, such an incredible big thing in German football. The whole mysticism about going to Berlin to play the final there. I mean, there's entire chants about it. Berlin, wir fahren nach Berlin, right? And then there's the whole the folklore from the Pokal schreibt seine eigenen Gesetze. The Pokal makes its own rules, which is how Kaiserslautern got there, and there is so many stories about the German Cup. Even the fact that, for example, Günther Netzer once famously substituted himself on and then scored the game-winning goal for Borussia Mönchengladbach in the final. And I remember my first final was 1995, and Borussia Mönchengladbach with Stefan Effenberg finally won a title after many, many decades, right? There's so many big stories that come the German Cup. My first German Cup that I covered was that Eintracht Frankfurt side that won the cup under Niko Kovac beating Bayern Munich. And it was really an incredible game and kind of launched that Eintracht Frankfurt era that they also won the Europa League in. And I think that is something really important to underline here. And Stefan, of course, no one has won the double other than Bayern Munich since Borussia Dortmund done it in 2012. And so there is that really important factor here that to really for Leverkusen to kind of crown themselves as this all-conquering German team in Germany, really putting a dent into Bayern's dominance is to win both, right? That is the ultimate crowning moment within German football, to have won both, the double. That's so that still has a really significant ring. And so I think if Leverkusen do win on Saturday, that will very quickly gloss over the fact that they lost that Europa League final.
Yeah, I mean, it comes into perspective, doesn't it? Of course, I'm sure if you ask Frankfurt fans, they'd probably tell you that their Europa League final success was huge to them. I think internationally, winning Europa League would probably be a bigger deal, to be honest with you. But, I mean, what happens internationally, what happens in Germany are two separate things, and so they should be. And I completely agree with you, and that's kind of what I was kind of alluding to. If Leverkusen win this, they go into next season as, the undisputed dominant team in German football. I mean, it doesn't really make a difference, I guess, in terms of, obviously, in the past, Bayern Munich have won 11 league titles in a row, and very rarely did they have the Pokal to match that. But it just kind of, it's just a nice kind of way to end the season. It puts that Europa League behind them, and it means they can just kind of draw a line under the season, celebrate it, put it in the history books, add another trophy to the cabinet in the lobby alongside the new Bundesliga title. And, I was on a radio station this week talking about, as in the lead up to the Europa League final, but it was a moment to talk about what Leverkusen have done this season. And, I said, look, this Bundesliga title quite literally redefines the club, because they were a club that defined themselves by never winning that league title. And now that they have, they're a new club. They have to contextualize themselves differently within the wider context of German football. And if they want to kind of really capitalize on what they've achieved this season, it would be to kind of instill that winning mentality. And doing so with the Pokal is a great start to that. Of course, it will all depend what happens next season, whether, Leverkusen can build on it and continue to challenge for league titles, or if it was a kind of once and done situation where we have seen in German football where, these teams kind of pop up, challenge Bayern for a year or two, then they kind of implode, or their players go their separate ways and it's up to someone else. We have to wait and see what happens to this Leverkusen squad, but obviously winning the Pokal will help instill that winning mentality. So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see.
I mean, that is a really important point, right? That was the greatness of the Dortmund team, that they managed to do this twice, not the double, but challenge Bayern and beat Bayern twice. And I think there's some really good signs here that Leverkusen could do all of that again. Because it seems like 90% of the players and the head coach is staying on, right? Which is the fundamental recipe here for this to work. And that is going to be the really interesting storyline next year. Can they repeat all of this? And maybe losing the Europa League final is actually going to help with that too, because if they had won everything this year, it would maybe be very difficult to top that. I guess you can win the Champions League, but you know what I mean. As for Kaiserslautern, I think they feel like they've been almost ignored in this story. And they put out a social media video where they kind of poked a little bit of fun at Leverkusen, pointing out all the trophies that they have won and how they done it in sometimes most spectacular fashions. And as I said earlier in the podcast, always being the underdog. What would it do for them to win this Pokal? I think an entire region would be redefined as well, and it could really resurrect a club that hadn't had the easiest time in recent years, Stefan.
Yeah, it'd be huge if they were to kind of cause the ultimate upset and win this game. Yeah, they have been kind of overlooked. Of course they have, because of the minnows. Not in a historical sense, but in a literal sense, in the modern sense, they're the minnows. It'd be great for German football. It would just kind of cap off what has been a really outstanding season in general for German football. You can kind of go through the whole list, even in the Bundesliga, in the sense, Leverkusen have done so well, Heidenheim have done so well, You can even go to the teams who've got promoted from the Zweite Bundesliga and how many new faces we're going to see next year. But to kind of cap that all off with Kaiserslautern winning the Pokal would really show just a fantastic array of colour and, alternative clubs winning success and fan groups who never really get to celebrate things doing exactly that. And it would be the perfect kind of antidote to what has been the last kind of 10 years of Bayern dominance in the league. And to an extent, even the kind of dull manner in which Dortmund and Leipzig have done just about enough to win the odd Pokal, but not much else. It's just nice to get some extra some new faces in there, some extra colour in there, some fan groups from parts of the country that don't really get a lot of coverage internationally. It'd be fantastic. And I think that's the kind of wonderful thing about the Pokal. I said it at the top of the show, it's just great to have two teams. I know Leverkusen got to the final not long ago, but it's great to have two teams that, if they win it, it's maybe not something new, but it's a novelty to an extent, and it gives us something new to talk about, gives us new stories to celebrate, and it means whoever wins, the rest of German football does as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm immensely looking forward to it. Stefan, do we dare giving predictions for this one?
I mean, I'm going to go for a 2-1 win for Leverkusen. I don't think they're going to be at their best, but I think they should still get enough to get over the line.
Okay, I have a funny feeling. I think Kaiserslautern are going to do it somehow 1-0 in extra time. My weird feeling about a bunch of things has worked out so far. We'll see. Although, I'd be shocked like everyone else if Leverkusen don't win this. But it's been a weird year. It's been a really weird year. And you and I still have a date after this weekend, Stefan, at Wembley. So don't worry, this isn't the last of us that you're going to hear. And there will be content obviously coming out after the Pokal Final as well, or right during. Pretty much I'm going to try to get out as much as possible. We also have your newsletter now on Bayern Munich. Fans must really feel deprived at this stage of the season, Stefan, because we don't talk about them nearly enough. So don't worry, Stefan has a great profile up on their maybe new head coach. We've seen head coaches being almost confirmed and not signing a contract at the last minute, so not done yet. But Vincent Kompany's article, your article on Vincent Kompany is up, and it's excellent, so give that a read. I have an article this week on Kaiserslautern, so check that out. We also obviously have our player of the season on the Substack as well, which our Substack readers voted on. So if you're not a subscriber yet and you feel like you missed out on the voting and you want to be part of it next year, you will have to subscribe, otherwise no chance. And yeah, that's almost it for us for this week, with the exception, of course, of our post-Pokal coverage. As always, this show is brought to you by Bet Online. And Stefan, before we wrap it up, any final thoughts?
No, just looking forward to 2 cup finals in 2 weekends, and a fantastic end to the season.
Absolutely. One more week of madness, and then we get a short break before the Euros. It's been insane this year, but it's also been great. And we'll be back soon. And until then, auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.